Institute's live broadcast. I'm Kelly Vaughn, Marketing Director for Rocky Mountain Institute, and I am joined today by two of my colleagues, Rocky Mountain Institute CEO Jules Kortenhorst. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you.
And electricity expert Leia Guccione. Welcome, Leia.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here.
And Jules, tell us a little bit about who's joining us today.
Yeah, and welcome everyone from really around the world. We have, I think, close to 1,000 people from 36 countries, so that's very exciting. Especially would like to thank the members of the Solutions Council and the Innovator Circle, people who've been part of the RMI family for an extended period of time and who are supporting all the work that we're doing. Really exciting to have you here. Our foundation partners and other donors that help fund our programs, and also those that have joined us and that follow our work or work with us on the content of our programs, all very glad to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to have all of you. And let's get started by getting to know our guests a bit better. What motivates each of you to do the work that you do every day? What really gets you excited about Rocky Mountain Institute's mission? And Leia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. When I think about that, I think about one, kind of what right now makes me so personally committed to what we're doing in our work, and then also some of the things that are most exciting for me right now. I mean, here we are in the middle of the holidays, and for me personally, I know that's been a lot of occasions to think about the things that I'm so grateful for, and first and foremost is my family. As you both know, I have a 2.5-year-old son, and I'm 36 years old today, and I think about where we'll be when my son is 36 years old. It'll be 2052, and we will have either responded to the climate crisis or we will not have. And I think about all the things that I'm thankful for in life and that I want him to have the same opportunities as I have. And so that's absolutely the reason why I'm so committed to what we're doing. But when I think about things to be excited about, there's been some very exciting announcements in Colorado recently. Our very own Xcel Energy just recently announced that they're going to be 100% carbon-free by 2050. And what's more, we've had a second Colorado utility, Platte River Power Authority, also announced that they're going to be 100% carbon-free by 2030. This isn't California, this isn't New York, this is right in our own backyard, and it's incredible to see what's happening.
Wonderful. Well, we're not going to let you off this broadcast without singing happy birthday. So get warmed up. Jules, what about you?
Yeah, in many ways it's similar. I have, in earlier settings, talked about the fact that I have 4 children, a bit older than yours.
Yes.
They will face a different planet than the one that I grew up on. And safeguarding this planet, we only have one, safeguarding this planet for them and maybe in due course their children is very much part of my motivation as well. But like Leia, I share this sense that there is a positive story. Yes, there is a concern about the accelerating pace of climate change, but there is also an incredibly hopeful story about an accelerating pace of the energy transition. And the work that we do here at Rocky Mountain Institute is inspiring for me in that it gives you hope. It shows that there is actually a way to bend the curve of emissions and make for an energy system that is clean, prosperous, and secure for everyone around the world. So that's part of the motivation as well. We do great work, and it's fun to be part of it.
Wonderful. We like to say our climate future is now, so it's exciting to learn more about why you two are particularly motivated to seize the moment, and I hope that all of you joining us today spend the next hour with the ability to reflect and think about what motivates you to act on climate, and again, thank you for joining us today. So really to dive right in, COP24 wraps up tomorrow in Poland. But that's not the only reason the energy conversation right now is particularly interesting. So let's start by setting a little bit of context. What do you think are the biggest issues really driving the international dialogue in climate and energy right now? What is at the top of your mind at this moment?
Well, when you put it in the context of the climate negotiations that are going on in Poland, it is good to reflect on the news, the reports, the science outcomes that we've seen over the last couple of months. First, there was the report from the International Panel on Climate Change, really the most serious globally organized science peer review mechanism on climate change that we've assembled. And that effort highlighted once again the tremendous urgency of starting to bend the curve on greenhouse gas emissions, basically saying that we don't have any more time left to waste, that we have to start reducing emissions today. And also highlighting in the specific most recent edition how a world that is 1.5 degrees warmer is a materially better world than a world that is 2 degrees warmer. And so that difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, which was always on the mind of some of the people, particularly from the most vulnerable countries, is now analyzed by the science a real substantial material difference. So that's good to know. And then more recently, the US climate assessment, again, a peer-reviewed mechanism by a large number of contributors from across the United States government and United States academia, that lays out the impacts on the United States as a country, as an economy, of the impending climate crisis. And basically, if we don't take drastic steps, the U.S. economy would be 10% smaller by the end of the century than it would be if we addressed this. So, and I would say a conservative estimate of the risks tells us that it is absolutely worth the investment to start to make that transition to a clean energy future more quickly. So that's part of the context, but I think there's another part of the context, and that's that accelerating pace of technology, Leia. Is that on your radar screen, I would say?
Yeah, Jules, I absolutely agree with the clear message that is coming from the IPCC report, the recent federal climate assessment, that absolutely is telling us that we need to operate, or we need to act with more urgency, with greater effect and faster than we have been, but it's absolutely not time to give up. When we look at some of the specific recommendations of the IPCC report, one of the things it tells us is that we need to eliminate coal from developed economies by 2030, from places like China and India by 2040, and from the rest of the world by 2050. And if you look at the rate with which we have started to phase coal out of the U.S. generating fleet just over the last 2 and 3 years, we're operating at the right pace. We need to keep going, and we can make that transition by 2030. We can't stop, though. We need to do that and then do more on top of it. And so there's absolutely positive indicators that we have the technologies, we have the abilities to reach that climate challenge. We just need to keep doing everything that we're doing and move faster and do more in some instances.
And you highlight the coal fleet, and that is a very good example where the pace of change, particularly here in the United States, is accelerating.
Yes.
There was some talk about, was there a war on coal or not? No, there's an economic challenge to an old technology by new technologies that are more cost effective. And we're seeing that play out in Colorado, in California, in the Pacific Northwest, all around the country. But it's not just in the area of power generation. One example that speaks to me is the electric vehicle markets. I'm the lucky owner of a small new Tesla, and it is a great car. But people still associate Tesla with the high end. Mine was actually the smaller model, so it wasn't that expensive. But it is also the General Motors Volt, it is Nissan, and it is a whole slew of announcements that we've seen just over the last 3 months. Volkswagen announcing a very, very significant investment in the pathway to electrification. Then General Motors making a painful announcement of reorganizing the manufacturing infrastructure here in the United States, but to a significant extent driven by the shift that they are seeing towards electric vehicles and less vehicles as a result of shared mobility. And then just this week, Daimler, owners of, among others, Mercedes, announcing $22 billion capital investment in battery technology alone. So you see it with small car manufacturers, with luxury car manufacturers, and everything in between, a transition in the industry that is going much faster than certainly we would have predicted. Absolutely. 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and Jules, what I'd add to that is what is either part of or sometimes complementary to so many of those announcements that you just mentioned is many of those same automakers are also announcing their entry into large vehicle electrification. We've seen unprecedented announcements around bus and bus fleet electrification and also freight electrification. And we're seeing not just niche players, but the biggest companies, your General Motors, your Fords, other global automakers moving into these spaces. And so we're not just thinking about how we electrify personal vehicles, but also all the other aspects of our transportation systems.
And one new project that we've just taken on is to understand in more detail the pathway for battery technology, because particularly those sectors that you're referring to, trucking and freight, a number of years ago we would have said, well, it's hard to think through what the pace of battery innovation would need to be for those to be electrified. Now we're seeing that happening much more quickly, but it begs questions around the energy density and how much battery can you pack in a long-haul freight truck, but also around grid integration. If you want to charge a truck or a bus rapidly, it puts a burden on the grid in terms of the loading infrastructure. But it is also an asset to the electricity grid in that figuring out when it is the right moment to charge those trucks or those buses can be a real support in stabilizing a grid that's more dependent on wind and solar. So there is a lot of innovation happening, and we have a team working in this space that is at the leading edge of the thinking, I would say, in this area.
That's great, and I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of these recent reports is that sense of urgency, that the effects that are human effects and economic or security effects of climate change are not something that is maybe imagined far out. They are effects that are here now that are really impacting people's lives, entire countries and entire communities. In fact, I believe another report from the World Health Organization said that life expectancy in India is 4 years shorter thanks to climate change. So it, again, is something that's very tangible and very palpable at this moment in time. And while there are technologies and solutions that are here now that are moving us quickly in that direction, the pace of innovation is very rapid, there is still more work and very important work to be done. So tell me a little bit about Rocky Mountain Institute's strategy and how we are adjusting our model and adjusting our priorities as an organization to meet that level of urgency head on and really make sure that the solutions that are coming to bear in certain markets or certain communities are scaling in time. You know, that's some feedback we've gotten from a lot of our NSC members and Innovator Circle members is it happening fast enough when we get there in time? So what are your thoughts on Rocky Mountain Institute's intervention in that scale?
Let me maybe first talk a little bit about what I see in the energy arena as a whole, and then translate it to the work that we do. So just now, Lee and I were talking enthusiastically about the sectors where we see tremendous progress. And the two areas where that is so clearly good news is in electricity and in electric mobility. In electricity, we can now confidently say that across much of the world, producing electricity by means of wind or solar power is simply cheaper than by building a new coal plant or a new gas plant. But what is interesting is in some parts of the world, including here in the United States, building a new solar unit or building a new wind plant is actually already cheaper than operating an existing coal plant. So we can start to think about closing down existing polluting capacity and replacing it with new clean capacity. And as we will see that shift happening across the world, the pace of the transition in the electricity sector will accelerate. Similarly, electric cars are soon going to be cheaper up front than internal combustion engine cars. And if you are worried right now about buying an electric car because it's still a little bit more expensive because of the cost of that battery, that dynamic might completely change when the battery is reduced in cost and the car is cheaper up front and you have no fuel cost. But there's another part of the energy economy that is not making as much progress as what I just described: electricity, mobility, order of magnitude 50% of the total energy equation. The other parts, less progress. For example, in our built environment, in many parts of the world, we still burn gas to heat the water or heat our houses, heat our buildings. And in the long run, we're going to have to do that by ways of electricity. So we started to do some work on that. I think Leia should talk about that in a moment. But that's an area where we need to make more progress. In industry, we can imagine how you can make steel without fossil fuels, but it's much more complicated. We don't yet fully know how you can make cement without greenhouse gas emissions. Petrochemicals, much more complicated. So there is a whole industry sector where the low carbon energy solution is still a work in progress. And people talk about hydrogen as a solution, and we know technically how to do it, but it's not yet cost effective. So there is work to be done in the industry arena, and then there is sectors like shipping and aviation where we don't have the answers completely crystallized either. So an optimistic story and an area where there's a lot more work to be done, and we're active in both. So maybe first talk about the progress in electricity and the built environment.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jules. We have worked with a number of organizations and done some of our own research looking at the opportunity to electrify space and water heating in homes across America. Many people don't realize that our built environment contributes to 10% of U.S. global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a huge swath of our opportunity to reduce our American greenhouse gas footprint. And most of that actually is in residential buildings. And when we look at the opportunity to end gas use in buildings by electrifying in concert with us moving towards more renewable energy on our grid, it's an incredible opportunity for us to upgrade the building stock in the U.S. while decarbonizing the grid, making homes more comfortable, making them safer, doing this at a carbon savings, and increasingly doing it at a cost savings. What we found, though, is that there is still more work to do. There's importance, there's innovation that needs to happen in business models so that we can electrify the 70 million U.S. buildings that are using gas or another type of fossil fuel on premise for space, water heating, cooking, and some other end uses. It's an incredible opportunity. We have some of the solutions now. What we need to be doing and where RMI is focused and working with to collaborate with other industry players is really to figure out how do we accelerate, how do we validate some of the solutions we have and then figure out how to scale them. That's really the exciting opportunity that we have in buildings, and we're starting to think about also what this looks like beyond the United States.
And obviously the climate and therefore the solutions we need on the more southern part of the world are dramatically different. There it's about air conditioning. And just a month ago, we launched a major program in the area of air conditioning. You look at countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, much of the Middle East and Africa, the growth in electricity load over the next 20, 30 years is going to come for a very significant part from a need for more air conditioning. Partly because people become more wealthy and earn a better living and therefore want to cool their houses. And partly because of climate change leading to warmer temperatures. And so if we don't do anything, demand for electricity as a result of air conditioning will go through the roof. So what we've done is we've launched a global air conditioning challenge. We believe that the technologies are out there to make air conditioning 5 times more energy efficient. We think those technologies are already in existence in the minds of entrepreneurs and innovators or in the labs of some of the solutions providers, the companies playing in this space. So we've launched this challenge. We are going to identify the best global technologies in air conditioning for the future. In conjunction with the Indian government and 40 other organizations around the world, we're running this race over the next 2 years to identify what will be the air conditioning solution of the world of the future. And then the winner will get a prize, and we will work with that winning technology to actually scale up the manufacturing, first in India, that's the partner country of choice, but then also in places like Indonesia, Brazil, and China. So we hope that will make a dramatic contribution in a completely different climate zone to decarbonizing the built environment.
And to shift gears a little bit, I think what's interesting about our work in India and our work in China historically has been our ability to look at opportunities to decouple continued economic growth with increased emissions and increased energy use. But in other parts of the world, our work is largely focused on sustainable and clean energy as a means to support economic development and social equity. I think another interesting trend that we see play out in our international work is the fact that a lot of our lessons on business models, economics, or change models, ways to get really great things done quickly, are transforming the way in which we approach those problems. Tell me a little bit about some of our international work and what you expect on the horizon to amplify our efforts on clean energy access. And then maybe tell me a little bit about how some of the things that we've learned with our much more years of experience working here on the U.S. electricity system, how that's translating into our work internationally.
Well, I'd like you to talk about Puerto Rico as an example.
Absolutely.
And then I'll talk about what we do in Africa, because you've been part of the team thinking about what we can do in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kelly, when we look at how we're able to leverage the insights and approaches that we're using in the U.S. Beyond the U.S., there's some incredible opportunities, both ones in Africa where they are trying to electrify and build out the system. And so they haven't yet sort of become fixed in any one particular regulatory model or business model or sort of system management approach. And so there's incredible opportunities to actually sort of design it right with the right incentives that support the right technologies at the outset. In Puerto Rico, it's a little bit sadder story where it took a major hurricane that devastated the island, wiping out more than 80% of the entire electrical infrastructure, taking over 270 days to restore power to the people of the island. But the RMI had an incredible opportunity to work with the Puerto Rican legislature, with the Puerto Rican Public Utility Commission, with other stakeholders on the island to really think, if we want to rebuild the system so that it's more resilient, how do we make sure that we design it with the right technologies, but also the right business models? How do we make sure that regulations and business models can really seize this opportunity to make the Puerto Rican grid not only a resilient backbone of the island, but a backbone of prosperity for their economy to come? And so we've been working to help deploy solar plus battery microgrids to schools and thinking about what are the best business models for microgrids that are either owned by one community or one building owner or by a whole community. And then also working with the legislature and others to think about what is the right opportunity to make sure that we design a utility business model that continues to attract investment and spur innovation and help direct investments in the grid that are going to make it cleaner and more resilient and really just help make it a true part of the engine of Puerto Rico's economy. And I think it's exciting that we have related opportunities in Africa and elsewhere to do it. Jules, do you want to say anything about our work there?
Yeah. In fact, the path is an interesting one, from solar being profitable here in Colorado to solar being the logical solution to bring resilience to Puerto Rico, to then looking at rural Africa, villages that are far away from where the grid is, and are not likely to be provided with grid-based electricity in the foreseeable future. But the good news is that we can now confidently say that same solution that works in Colorado and in Puerto Rico can also work in rural Rwanda, Ethiopia, Nigeria. So over the course of the last 3 years, we've gone from a first early project in one country, Rwanda, to working across sort of Saharan Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, not just working on the large electricity system, but very significantly also working on rural electrification based on solar plus batteries. And those mini grids in Africa are not yet being deployed at scale, and they are not yet therefore always as cost effective, and there's still a lot of work to do to figure out both the business models, how can mini grid companies make money, but also what's the regulatory framework? How does a government that wants to make sure that rural villages get access to electricity in a fair way at a reasonable cost, but also needs to attract the capital for that, how can they create a regulatory framework for that? So we've been helping governments and multilaterals and some of the companies in the space to work on this. Interestingly, we're now at a point where that learning on the ground in these countries has triggered us to think, okay, we've done 4 or 5 countries in Africa, we've done work across the Caribbean, but there's a lot more work to do, and how are we going to organize ourselves to have impact all across the developing world? It's hard to imagine how here from Colorado or our New York office or our New Indian office, how we get to 150 developing countries around the world. That would require a scale-up of our resources that is daunting. But is there another way to get our insights and our lessons learned and our capability out to people without having to put a team on the ground? So we're in the middle of a deliberation with some of our donors and some of our board members to think through how can we drive our impact from the 5-6 countries in Africa and our work in China and in India and in the Caribbean, and spread that all across the world without having to put people on the ground in each and every capital.
Yeah, Jules, I think these opportunities are so exciting. When I look at the work that we've done in the U.S. with our Electricity Innovation Lab, which is heavily oriented around this idea that if we can create the right forums that bring the right change agents together and helps them have these robust conversations about the opportunities, the challenges, and the solutions that we need to start testing, and how we support leaders to take action, I think we have some incredible opportunities to think about how through supporting leaders to take bold action, we can create these network effects that really will help the solutions that we know do exist that don't require necessarily more time in the lab, and spread them and scale them quickly as we need to really meet the climate challenge.
In fact, many people who are listening to us will think of RMI first and foremost as an organization with deep technical expertise and some savvy economics. And you are an example of that as a nuclear engineer, I know. But it is interesting that a skill, a competency that we've been working on over the last years and that we've really developed, I'd say about half of our people have been trained in it, is that multi-stakeholder facilitation, that bringing together of leaders and stakeholders in the transition and having them learn from each other. And we do that with our ELAB accelerator here in the US that you are very involved in. But we've seen that same effort work very effectively for us, whether it is in Lagos, Nigeria, where we hosted a bunch of the mini-grid companies with regulators and financiers, to just recently I was in Pune, India, where the Indian government has asked us to help them think through the mobility transition. And some of the work we're doing is at the national level, helping the Indian government lay out the policies and the regulatory frameworks for electric mobility. But we also want to show on-the-ground progress, so we hosted a mobility accelerator in the city of Pune in India. And in India, cities are very quickly very large. So Pune is maybe not one of the largest cities in India, but it is still one of the very largest cities by global standards. And very congested and worried about how economic growth will continue there when traffic is already a problem, and worried about pollution. And so Pune was the city that we selected as the leading city in our mobility lab in India. We had probably 150 participants in a 3-day multi-stakeholder process, government, businesses, utility, the local police force, thinking about traffic, to plan out what the mobility solutions of the future, clean and efficient for a city like Pune could be. And we're hoping to roll that out across a number of other cities in India. And there's lessons to be learned there that hopefully can soon also be spread to cities beyond India. So it's exciting to see how we are able to carry lessons from one part of the world to another, and how our own skill set is developing, and how we are bringing on board new colleagues who have those complementary skills.
One of the wonderful things I heard my colleague Clay Stranger mention the other day when I had the pleasure of sitting in one of our breakfast briefings, where Clay and Sam Hidda, who is also on our India mobility team, were describing the magnitude of the challenge that we're trying to solve, and talked about our recent urban mobility lab. When asked, this seems so massive. How are we going to unravel such a tricky problem? And as India grows, how do we wrap our minds around this? And he very confidently looked her in the eye and said, I feel like we're coming in at the exact right time. We are at the beginning. We are here at the right time to solve this problem. And through our work in India and other countries, the size of the country and the influence of the Indian government is an enormous scaling model in and of itself, right? Because one sweeping decision can change so much if you look at programs like their LED retrofit program and things like that. So sometimes the very nature of these partnerships are a scaling model and an impact model in their own right. And when it comes to these decision makers in the cities or countries or even companies in which we work, I wanted to ask you both on your perspective about the role of cities and companies in leading this transition. I think that's been at the top of everyone's mind, especially at COP24, when a coalition of American companies and cities, the America's Pledge, is really front and center of instilling confidence that there is still a commitment domestically toward the Paris goals. What is your perspective on the role of cities and companies in leading this transition or making it happen at the rate and scale we need it to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical. In a lot of the things that I've read around innovation, more than one scholar has sort of posited that cities are actually where the best innovation happens, because you have this dynamic of co-location, you have multiple sort of economic forces and work streams, you have proximity, you have sort of very proximate cause and effect that happens in a city, and so it's just this perfect place for innovation to spark and take root and have real changes. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we're seeing cities in the U.S. and globally really step up to the climate challenge and make bold commitments. I was speaking with my husband just yesterday, and he was telling me about the announcement by the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, who is there in Poland right now at COP24. And these are the major American cities, not just of the East and West Coast, but of the heartland, backbones of industry, that are seeing that this is something that they need to invest in, but also can potentially have tremendous returns back to their local communities. And so we're seeing really great progress with cities, and then corporates, I think, are the same way. I saw a graph just earlier this week from our Business Renewables Center and Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance team that corporates will have procured over 6 gigawatts, I think, of wind and solar combined in 2018. It's a record year. And that's additional to what states are deploying, I should say states and utilities are deploying as part of their renewable portfolio standards. So tremendous action, and it's part of what continues to give me cause for hope. But Jules, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that and maybe brag for a moment, because that 6 gigawatts that you're referring to, I confirmed with our team yesterday. All of those transactions, so that's 6 gigawatts of new renewable capacity on the electricity grid announced over the course of 2018. And all of those transactions have a member or multiple members of our Business Renewable Center involved in them. We stood that platform up 4 years ago from scratch. At the time, I think the total corporate market for renewables was about half a gigawatt new capacity a year, and tenfold increase over 4 years. So that's tremendous. And we've taken the significant step now to spin that community, the Business Renewable Center, out into the Renewables Buyers, Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. It is a collaboration with WWF, with WRI, and with BSR. And we are putting all of our programs for corporate renewables buying together into this new industry association at the request of the buyers, because we think it can have more impact when it becomes its own independent organization. And of course, it also provides for financial stability for this program, as the corporates are taking responsibility for funding this effort. So that's a very exciting success story. So yes, corporates are stepping up. You already mentioned cities. And at the same time, in some parts of the world, the national governments tend to be the best clients. So in China, quite a bit of our work is still with the state government. In China specifically, we are affiliated with the National Energy Administration, essentially the Department of Energy of the Chinese government. And the NEA is very focused on reforming their electricity market to be a wholesale market approach along the same lines as we're doing here in the United States and in Europe. And so we're acting as advisors to the NEA and the state grid company, Southern Grid Company, the two major electricity companies in China, how to build up that wholesale electricity market. If China moves from a planned economy approach, dispatching their grid, to a market-based approach, then automatically they're going to first dispatch solar and wind, because those are marginal lowest cost. They have virtually no marginal cost. And therefore, automatically they'll get more of the production and dramatically reduce emissions. The total impact of that transition alone, when we get that done, is 1% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So it's a very important program. Our colleagues in our Beijing office are working closely with the government. So sometimes you pick a government partner because that's the right partner. Sometimes it's a corporate partner. Sometimes it's a city. Cities are now banding together here in the United States to procure renewables. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we are working with a number of cities who, because they have related and ambitious climate goals, who are forming coalitions or forming cohorts, and RMI is working with groups like World Resources Institute and others to think about how we can best support them in not just setting these goals, but actually making progress against these goals. And so recently we put out our, I think this is it right here on the table, our carbon-free cities handbook, and also shortly after that, our carbon-free regions handbook. And I love these resources because we've worked with a number of cities through our electricity program and through the Electricity Innovation Lab, and so many of them have, they're sort of, where they're struggling to make progress is they're sort of short on the tools that are equal to their ambition. And both of these publications that we produce really identify some very straightforward, well-tested, proven things that all cities and regions can start doing almost immediately to start making progress on climate and clean energy, and really reaping a lot of the benefits that come from the same.
Yeah, and it goes to this question of how do we get to scale in the impact without having to continue to grow our money, right? We cannot help every city on a city-by-city basis, but by putting out these tools and making them open source and giving access to our partners to use this content, the scaling can happen beyond the boundaries of our own organization.
Absolutely. In so many instances, there's no need for a new feasibility study, which can be costly and time-consuming to these cities, to these counties, that enough cities have already taken measures that there are a great bevy of solutions that cities and regions can roll out immediately. And so right now, what we're really doing with these cities is trying to make those more familiar, more visible, and then think about what is the capacity building we need to be doing with these city and regional stakeholders to help them take action on these opportunities that we know are tested and can scale.
And I think quite often it's difficult to articulate how a resource or a piece of thought leadership or a new report that introduces a new business model is really a way to drive meaningful change in the industry. But I think the Carbon-Free Cities Handbook is an excellent example. It's been downloaded by more than 10,000 city leaders around the world. In addition, it has been translated for a Chinese audience based on a request from city leaders there. So I think it's an excellent example to show that when you have a finger on the pulse of what the industry really needs to translate what are wonderful and admirable carbon-free goals by hundreds of cities worldwide, and what they really need to take meaningful action and see results and deliver those results to the communities that they are responsible for. It's really been wonderful to see how valuable those resources have been. I also want to give you both the opportunity to talk about some other thought leadership that RMI has been responsible for over the past year, specifically as it relates to the financing mechanisms that are responsible for making and scaling the clean energy solutions much faster than they would without sort of some of these market mechanisms, because those have been incredibly well received and influential right from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. Jules, do you want to start?
Yeah, and if you talk about what we're doing on dealing with stranded assets, I'll mention for a moment a new concept that we've recently laid out. So we've built a climate finance practice here at RMI that now is made up of 10 very passionate and talented colleagues. And one of the important insights that they recently laid out was this idea that we get very excited when we see an increase in investment in renewable energy, an increase in investment in the clean forms of energy of the future. But that's only part of the equation. We also have to look at how much capital is already invested in the fossil fuel-based, polluting energy asset base of the past. And if you look only at the flows, then you're not considering the stock. Think of it as a bathtub. The bathtub is filled with dirty water. Clean water is coming in, but we also need to empty the drain at the bottom and let the dirty water flow out. So a lot of our focus is going to be not just on what is the inflow of new clean energy finance mechanisms of the future, but how do we deal with this big stock, this bathtub filled with fossil fuel assets, some of which will have to retire early, which goes to some of the work that you're involved in.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we have been very much investing, no pun intended really, in our financial capabilities across the Institute, and specifically with our U.S. electricity program. We have a great team of folks who have come from the finance industry and other parts of the electricity and energy industry, really looking at what are these financial innovations that can help us sort of smooth the transition of fossil-fueled assets that are no longer economic, that are underperforming relative to the clean energy solutions we could replace them with, and how can we deploy these sort of financial solutions like securitization and other tools to help us sort of gracefully retire some of these assets and replace them with new, affordable, high-performing clean energy solutions like wind and solar, and also things like what we call virtual power plants or clean energy portfolios. Right now, what's exciting is that we have the technologies that can allow us to bring a combination of solar, wind, efficiency, batteries together and operate them in such a way that they operate just like a sort of traditional power plant would, even though it's a mixture of distributed resources, which is why it sometimes gets called a virtual power plant. We like to call them clean energy portfolios, but they're very much one and the same. And so bringing these financial solutions that help us retire persistent fossil generators early is going to be critical. Because it's important that we want to move as quickly towards the clean energy future as possible, but I think long-held mantra of RMI is doing so in the most sort of economically prudent and sort of business value creating way is actually how we're going to go as fast as we need to go. And so thinking about capital creation and capital destruction and what are financial tools to support the same is really important.
And linked to that is another whole new area of work, which is the information technology and digital energy practice. Because what you're describing, this idea that intermittent renewables matched with very flexible demand that is intelligent, can actually balance an electricity grid in a very effective way, is dependent on, requires smart, intelligent way of using energy. So we have been working on and investing in our own digital capability and our understanding of the way in which IT and energy intersect. Two exciting examples that we've talked about in the past. Our subsidiary organization, Wattime, in California, has developed this algorithm that allows you to tell at any moment in time, if we turn on the lights or we turn off the lights right now, what type of electricity are we turning on and off? Is it wind, or is it coal, or is it gas, or is it solar? And by understanding that, by knowing precisely what the marginal carbon footprint of the dispatch of the electricity grid is, we can charge batteries. For example, in California, under the largest battery program, we can charge batteries at the moment that our electricity is clean, and we can pull electricity out of the batteries at the moment that we don't have clean electricity available and we are running a gas plant at the margin. So that's a very exciting development. And similarly, we continue to build on the blockchain infrastructure for the energy system of the future. Energy Web Foundation was created 2 years ago. It has grown dramatically. We've brought on board about 100 energy companies, from large to small, regulators, participants. We've raised quite a bit of money. This foundation now has its own team in Europe. It's working feverishly to launch in the beginning of the new year the open source blockchain infrastructure on which we can support important parts of the energy system. For example, right now when we trade green certificates to pay a bit of extra for green electricity, that is a manual process, Excel spreadsheets, paper slips, it's not very convenient. All of that can be blockchain based, dramatically reducing the cost of those transactions and making it more effective and efficient. One of the examples of the innovations that we hope blockchain will bring to the energy space. So there's a lot of innovation happening. There's more innovation that is needed. We talked at the beginning a little bit about industry, and one of the areas we want to dig into next year is what is going to be the clean fuel of industry that helps decarbonize steel and cement and petrochemicals. And there's a lot of talk about hydrogen as likely being the energy carrier, the fuel for such clean industry solutions. But we're at the early stages. Electrolyzers exist, but they still need to become more cost effective. We might take lessons from gas distribution, but there is no hydrogen distribution system yet in the way that will be necessary. And thinking all of that through and partnering with industry to develop early pilots is one of the programs that we're hoping to raise money for in the new year, so that we can expand into that area.
Wonderful. And I think when it comes to disruptive innovation, it seems like many of the innovations that RMI pursues or works on are sort of not grounded in any one sector, but they're sort of at the seams of that electricity transformation. You talked a little bit about building electrification. We haven't talked much about our vehicle to grid work. Can you tell me a little bit about what you see as being the biggest disruptive, innovative opportunities that we might have looking forward for something that will really move the needle sort of at those seams or intersections of the sectors in which we focus?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with this sort of vehicle to grid opportunity, the sort of gnarly question is, how do we make sure that the grid doesn't become a barrier to electrifying our transportation industry? And how do we make sure that the electrification of transport doesn't become a barrier to decarbonizing the grid? So that is sort of the chicken and the egg problem, but we see exciting progress on that front. In the U.S., we're working with utilities in the Pacific Northwest, in New York, and elsewhere to think about how do we build out electric vehicle charging infrastructure, both for the vehicles that we're seeing today, for Jules Model 3, for the Nissan Leaf that I drive, but also for the vehicles that we're going to see coming on the road increasingly in just the next 5 years, for those electric buses in downtown Manhattan or downtown Seattle, for those short and medium distance trucks that are used to bring you your Christmas packages from Amazon or what your retailer of choice. So automakers, transportation network companies, fleet operators, and utilities are really working together to understand what's the right equipment for the right vehicles, what's the right market structure that's going to incentivize it so that we accelerate towards those solutions and not slow down. Another really exciting opportunity that we're working on is in China, where you actually have the largest electrified fleet operators in the world. And so the RMI team in China has been working with several fleet operators that are operating hundreds, if not thousands, of electrified sort of small trucks, and we're collecting incredible amounts of data. And to this point, Jules made about us and our investments in digital solutions and IT innovations. We're bringing big data science to those fleets to really understand, if you have a fleet of electrified trucks, how do you optimize it? How does it change your operating costs as a fleet operator? And I think this is particularly exciting. One of my brothers-in-law, he runs logistics for a poultry distributor here in the U.S., and I'm excited to see him at Christmas and talk to him about the work we're doing and what it's going to mean for these sort of mainstream industries in the U.S.
And we are on the leading edge there, and it's not always as easy to find a client that is willing to engage with us on this. So it's incredibly helpful that we have support from the donors on the call today, from big foundations that have backed us to develop this expertise, because particularly when it comes to a new area like information technology and energy, where we have to build our own capacity and where we have to invest before we can start to market some of those ideas, to provide those insights to government leaders and city leaders and business leaders, it's helpful that we have the financial resources to make those early investments. We're grateful for all of you to help us with that.
I think one of the aspects of RMI and our change model and the partnerships that we've been able to build and sustain with in-market partners, with philanthropic partners is, I love the euphemism, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Absolutely.
And RMI has such a deep bench of amazing experts, a million tools to bring to bear to really influence in a meaningful way this energy transition. And so I just sort of want to take us back a little bit and address sort of the big question that I know has been on the minds of a lot of individuals who follow RMI and have followed us for years. I feel more than ever, and when we asked our Solutions Council and Innovator Circle members to submit questions, most of the questions, if not all of the questions, were very common, and they were along the lines of, is it too late? We've heard about a lot of solutions today, a lot of solutions that are already well underway, some that will be undertaken and scaled in the coming years, but I can't help but feel this overall sense from our supporters that there's some fear and apprehension there. Is it too late to get the important work done that we need to get done to mitigate climate change in time?
Kelly, last year when we sat together for the similar call, it was just before the Christmas holiday as well, and we went to this movie, The Finest Hour, about Winston Churchill. And it paints a fascinating story. It shows Winston Churchill at the beginning of World War II taking over responsibility for the British government right at the moment that the British troops are stranded in Dunkirk. And the situation is truly very dire. And Churchill realizes that telling people how difficult the situation is alone is not going to do it. So he holds on very, very hard in the beginning of this tenure. He holds on to this idea of going to give a hopeful story. And that's what we've been trying to do at RMI as well. Applied hope. There is hope. But at the same time, he sees that the people need to know the brutal facts. And when he goes on the subway, it's a vignette in that movie for dealing with the brutal facts, with the fact that climate change is accelerating and that the situation is dire and we have to move fast. Holding these two truths in our head at the same time, that's the crucial challenge that we have. Yes, it is a daunting challenge, but there is unbelievable hope. There is an enormous amount of momentum across the energy landscape. In some areas, it's going faster than Leia dared to dream in her wildest dreams.
Yeah.
Electric mobility is moving faster than any of the automotive companies thought 3 years ago. And at the same time, we are still facing a lot of challenges, and there is lots more work to be done. And so I don't think this is a question of optimism or pessimism. As Amory would say, this is a question of applying hope and saying, yes, we can. We have a lot of work to be done, but it is sometimes daunting.
Yeah, Jules, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I still serve in the reserves, and I spent 8 years in the Navy. And one of the things that we received a lot of training and support on is this idea of sort of leadership in the face of adversity. And when we work with our partners in the U.S. electricity industry and elsewhere, one of the things and one of the dynamics that we plan for and try to optimize against is that just because the person before you didn't solve this problem doesn't mean that it's not your problem to solve. We have about 12 years to make some of the greatest improvements and changes in global energy use, and the time for leadership is now, because if it's not, it must be us. It is our problem to solve, and we have most of the tools we need to solve them. It's just about action and moving faster, not about necessarily going back to the lab. So I just think a lot about these examples of leadership and how do we support people to be that leader in the face of adversity, because that's what we need to solve the climate crisis.
On that note, can I maybe wrap up by wishing you all a very, very wonderful holiday season, a happy Hanukkah or a Merry Christmas, a great New Year's break. But also say thank you for all the support that you've given us over the last year. When you're doing tough jobs, it's great to feel the hand of people in your back, to know that you have supporters and allies and friends all around the world in the work that we do. We have a very ambitious agenda for the upcoming year. You've heard about all the things we want to take on, and we're only going to be able to do that with your help, with your support. So thank you very much for being with us here this afternoon. Thank you very much for all the support that you've given us in the past year, and I hope we will have an opportunity to lean on you, to work with you, to partner with you in the upcoming year again.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you. And I just want to close by, again, extending our deepest gratitude to all of you for joining today. And thank you to an anonymous family who is matching any donations made within the next 24 hours. We have a $15,000 challenge match. that is being extended to everyone on this call today. So if you do feel inspired by the words that you've heard today, if you feel a little more hopeful, a lot more motivated to get the hard work done and roll up our sleeves collectively, we hope that you'll consider supporting Rocky Mountain Institute, and we are so gracious to all of you for your time, for your attention, and for your support. So with that, I echo your happy holiday and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.